Just another PSA. You all are amazing, and you should believe in yourself. When I was 9 years old, a family friend, I got, basically I was molested, and that kind of changes your mindset. And so she convinced me, so I did meth, and then after that, I started doing it every day, and it was just like a switch. And I always felt in my heart like, oh, I'm not a drug addict because I'm not putting a needle in my arm. So I always I thought it was like fine because I'm not doing heroin, and that my sister was a drug addict kind of thing. Right when I got sober, I attempted suicide.
Okay.
This is before I even told my mom what happened, after I had gotten arrested and stuff. And I took a bunch of pills, and I realized that was a big mistake. And so I ended up going in the hospital for 72 hours. And that's when I realized, okay, I got to go home and address this with my mom, because I was shameful. And I would say if I didn't get, clean and sober off drugs and alcohol, I'd either be dead or in jail, And so it's like when I started running, I realized it really gave me confidence. So within only like 4 or 5 months of running, I did 2 marathons and then like a few 10Ks. I've run, I think, like 30 something marathons. I don't even count those anymore because I don't even do, I can't remember the last time I did a marathon.
That's a training day.
But I have done over to 340 ultra marathons. And I think around 140 or 150, 100 plus miles. So 100 miles or more of those ultras is what that is. Podiums, I think I have like 89 podium finishes.
So if anybody happens to be listening to this and they're saying, but I'm 50, how do you help them understand, other than saying, because you could say, well, I'm 60, I'm actually older than you and I'm doing it. And those, like, their head might say, yeah, but you're different because of fill in the blank. So if they happen to go into that place, how do you help?
Well, I tell them, first of all, you have to.
And this is a question I get commonly, having done ultras and doing ultras myself, is, do you think that's healthy for you?
So I do have a heart condition. I have what's called mitral valve prolapse, but it's 30 years ago. But I look back and I'm like, man, had I not been a drug addict, I would have never become an ultrarunner because I had to quit drugs to learn that there was something else for me in life. So I always say I have no regrets because I had to go through all these things in my life to get me to where I am right now. I'm here for a reason. That's why I'm still alive. That's why I got sober. That's why I wrote a book. That's why, I do so many races. It's just like who I am is to help people.
There ain't no easy way out. Hey, I will stand my ground. And I won't back down. I won't back down. I won't back down.
The Patina'd podcast is about the earned wisdom found in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd podcast. Okay, hello. So welcome to another episode of the Patina'd podcast. Today I'm really excited to introduce to you Catra Corbett. And so Catra, I'm going to do the introduction a little bit different today. So when I had Ed Eddinghausen on my show, he was, I think, my third episode or something like that. So the way I started off the conversation with Ed was essentially I said, hey, this is a show where the underlining theme is resilience. Mm-hmm. And so what I would like to do, instead of me go through all of these things that you've accomplished, I want to hear you kind of talk on it. And so I would like for you to give your credentials as to why you're a resilient person and why people should take, your word seriously in terms of resilience.
Okay. So how I got into it was actually I got clean and sober and I needed an outlet, once I wasn't able to go to nightclubs and all of that anymore. Mm-hmm. So I started running, and then, the first year of running, like actually, I started running out of the blue because I was bored with walking. I was walking and I was working out in a gym and all of that. So I decided, you know what, this walking thing's getting boring. I'm doing 3 miles a day. And this is long before there was like GPS and all of that. So the only way I knew like my mileage was I drove in my car and set my odometer. So that's how I knew exactly my little loop was 3 miles. And one day I just decided out of the blue, I'm going to run this loop. So I ran it and I felt great. And I was like, you know what? I want to do a race. So I was in a Barnes and Nobles and there was a flyer for a 10K. And mind you, I just only had done 3 miles was the longest I ran. And so this was like the second week of me after I did my first run. And so I did a 10K and I thought I was going to die. I didn't know anything about pacing. I hated running, by the way, growing up. I hated anything to do with running. I only played sports because my father was the president of Fremont City Soccer League and my brother was the athlete. But my parents like made me go into, team sports because they thought I was too much of a hermit, believe it or not, and too quiet. So I played soccer, but I refused to run. So anyways, I sat on the sideline most of the time. So anyways, I did this 10K and I got back to my car. I thought I was going to die. Didn't know anything about pacing, just ran as fast as I could because I didn't know anything about running. And there was a flyer for the San Francisco Marathon in 3 months. So I decided I'm going to run a marathon, but I knew it was like 20 something miles. I had watched Boston on TV with my dad because my dad was a runner at the time and he had run a marathon. And so I asked my friend Kevin, because I didn't have any friends at this point. I had gotten sober 2 years prior to starting to run, and I had to get rid of all of those friendships because they were, all people that I was using with and whatever. And so I couldn't be around those people anymore to maintain my sobriety. So my friend Kevin, I asked him, I said, like, how far is the marathon? He's like, oh, it's 26.2. So I went into that Barnes and Nobles and I was like, geez, I guess I got to get a book on how to run a marathon. Cause there was no Facebook, Instagram, any social media back then. This is in 96. And so I got a book and I had to skip to the chapter to where it said you have 3, what you're doing for your long run prior to your 3 months out for your training. And it was a 6-month training program. And I had to skip to the 3-month part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it said to do 9 miles. So I ended up driving in my car, going 4.5 miles out, with the odometer. And I was like, okay, there's a gas station here. I know I need to turn around tomorrow. So I ended up doing that 9 miles, felt fantastic, and started from there. So within my first year of running, actually within only like 4 or 5 months of running, I had did 2 marathons and then like a few 10Ks. And the second year of my running, so it was like
so sorry, Catra. So real quick, and then because we're going to get into some of the running here in a little bit and a little bit more in depth, but if we were to fast forward to that experience after you finished your first and even your second marathon, and we get to today, what do the total numbers look like roughly? How many marathons, how many ultras, how many 100s, how many podiums, like this sort of thing?
I've run, I think, like 30 something marathons. I don't even count those anymore because I don't even do, I can't remember the last time I did a marathon.
That's a training day.
But I have done over to 340 ultra marathons. And I think around 140 or 150, 100 plus miles. So 100 miles or more of those ultras is what that is. Podiums, I think I have like 89 podium finishes. The last time I looked in ultra sign up are like 70, so something like that. I'm not super fast, but I've just been, consistent, as I've gotten older too. So I've done a lot, and I think a lot of it has to do with I'm stubborn. So.
And you've also done, I saw, so you're, what was it, like oldest female to finish Triple Crown of 200s. So you started getting into 200s as well.
In 2015. Yeah. And that's my favorite distance. So the long, around 2015, I think I did like my first solo in 2016 with my first official, and I've done 18 official 200-mile finishes. And then I've done a lot of like FKT stuff or on my own, like where I ran from Fremont to Yosemite Valley, 200 miles. I did what was called the Muir Ramble route. So it was the route that John Muir walked when he went to Yosemite, and that was 324 miles, and I got the FKT for that. And it was because I bought a book inside of REI like years and years ago, like 2009. And I was like, oh, someday I'm going to do that. And I was getting ready to move from Fremont to Bishop. And I was like, I should probably do this now. I'm still here and I can get my friends to help me. And so I did that. I started from San Francisco, and I did like he did. I got on the the ferry, and went to Oakland. So he started, he came on a boat wherever he came from to San Francisco, and then he took the ferry to Oakland, and then he started his walk from there. And so this couple wrote this book. So I started my run from there and did that, I think, in like 7 days or something. So yeah.
So I've
done a lot of crazy stuff on my own. Like that's just like I can't even count how many times I've run 100 or 200 miles on my own, just because that's what I do as training. Like for these 200s now. Yeah, it was an official race.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. I think when we were even scheduling to set this up, you're like, hey, I would like to, but I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to go and do this trail. I'll be out for, I can't remember how long. What was
like
that
a
trail?
Month. I was going out on the Pacific Crest Trail, which I hiked in 2007, but I had like a month free to go do stuff. And so I went out and I did a couple of 100 miles out there, and I got a bladder infection. So I kind of sidelined that. But then I went and did other stuff. So me and my friend John, we went over and did the Trans Catalina Trail. And then I wanted to do like this route from like in near the Hollywood sign through Hollywood and all of this. So we did some like crazy run through there. And then I went and worked at the Big Bear races over there, and then had a guest speaking appearance there. So yeah, I'm always doing crazy stuff. Like this week, I'm running 25 to 30 miles every day for the next 6 days, only because on the 7th day, I'm going on a backpacking trip with a friend and taking my little dog. So I'm like, well, we're going to do 30 miles in 2 days there. But so it's all training for the 200s. It's like lack of sleep, get up at 4:30 in the morning, go, and I'm breaking it up because I take my little dog in the morning, Forrester. He's good for 17 miles, but I'm taking him around 8 to 10 in the morning with me.
I was wondering that. I'm like, how many miles can those little legs go? Oh. He's a wiener dog, so I was wondering that. Yeah.
So anybody that knows me knows Truman, and he passed away 2 years ago, and he ran 550Ks. So he was my wiener dog that I adopted at 6.5. Was only fostering him, wasn't planning on adopting him, and he was afraid of everything. And running, he came alive. So if you Google him, Dirt Doxy, like there's articles and magazines. He's been in Runner's World, like Ultrarunning magazine, like every magazine, like me. But he was the dog version of me. So this little guy now is up and running, and my other two can run 17 miles. But my other boy dog, he's 5. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and then the 2-year-old. So, but they've all run 17 miles at a stretch, but the other two don't like to go in the summer because they have long hair. And if my boyfriend's not with me, Baxter's obsessed with him. He won't get going. He'll do like 8 miles with me. But after that, he's like, no, where's my dad? I don't want to run unless my dad's with us. So, but Forrester's, he will do ultras. He's fast. He's like so fast. I have to keep him on leash because he'll want to chase things. He did his first 14er last week. He did White Mountain Peak. And people are like, did you have to carry him? Like as I'm going down. And I'm like, no, he's pulling me. Like, look who's pulling on the leash. And he wanted to like attack marmots and stuff. So yes, wiener dogs can run
get a
far.
little bit off trail.
Mm-hmm.
All right, real quick. So in the theme of resilience, I have 2 challenges for you, the listener. The first challenge: if you find this interview insightful or interesting, you really like the content that is coming in, please like, follow, share, subscribe, all of those things within whatever platform you use. Tell a neighbor, tell a friend, talk to your cat about it. Like, let's get this out there. This show is real tiny, and the interviewees that come on this show and share their insight, their wisdom, it can help a lot of people. So the more that it can get out, the better that it can serve the mission that I'm trying to do, which is to normalize chasing failure. So the second challenge that I have for you is to invest 15 minutes of your time into a timeshare opportunity that I have for you. I'm just kidding. I'm not selling you a timeshare opportunity. But what I am doing is I want you to take 15 minutes of your time and invest that into another episode that I have done. Please help me know. What I'm hoping for is for you to come in the comment section and give me some good feedback. Maybe scrutinize me a little bit. Let me know how I can be better as an interviewer to help this show be more palatable for you. But this isn't all about me. How did you like the guest? What were some of the insights that you got from the guests? Leave that in the comments section as well. This is all good stuff. So within the theme of resilience, those are the two challenges that I have for you. Help me, help you, help the show. Let's get better. Let's keep growing. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so my follow-up question to the intro of you just sharing a bunch of credentials of all these crazy things you've done and crazy distances and all this sort of thing was, I'm kind of doing some research on you, and I'm like, and you're an author too, by the way, which I found out too late. And so unfortunately I wasn't able to read the book before this, because every time I've had an author on, I've read their book prior to the interview, and I just found out too late. But in the research that I have done on you, there's so many similarities between you and Ed Eddinghausen or the Jester. And you had said you started running even before him. One of the similarities is all the accomplishments, all of the belt buckles that you have accumulated by finishing races, and all the podiums and all the 100s and now the 200s, and just the consistency for such a long time, right? That speaks to like this, not just physical resilience, but mental resilience, especially when it comes to ultras. But then also I heard you say, a big part of your running journey is you see it as helping new runners or being around for the person who seems to be struggling. And that's the same thing that Ed said in my interview with him, was like, he's like, when I feel myself starting to get in a down place, I look around for somebody else who's sucking so I can go be of service to them. And then it brings me out of me, it helps me to invest into others. And you being in recovery, that's a theme within the 12-step rooms, right?
Exactly.
And so my question was going to be, having said all these similarities, are you the female Jester? But now learning that you have been around longer than him, maybe I should say, is he the male Catra? I don't know.
Yeah. For our own people, everybody's different, and he's doing his thing, and he loves, he does a lot of flatter races. I don't like flat. I'm the mountain, mountain running.
Yeah.
He doesn't like a lot of that. And if you talk to him, he's like, he struggles with doing the harder races like that. With
he said the elevation.
Yeah, he doesn't do well. So, but he does well at flat, and I hate flat.
Yeah.
I do it just because it's a challenge for me. But the older I get, the harder it is for me. I'd rather have be going up a mountain using different muscle groups, not that constant, repetition over and over. And, and maybe that's why I never get injured too, because I'm constantly varying it, mixing it up. And I do work out in a gym. I've always, before I started running, the 2 years before I started running, once I got sober, I was in the gym all the time doing workouts, and lifting weights. And that's super important. The older you get, especially for females, we start losing a lot of muscle mass. It's it's like you start getting thinner, and I'm not trying to get thinner, but the more I run, it's like, man, I got to, make sure I'm putting on more muscle to protect everything, the joints and all of that. I'll be 60 this year. So in December. So, and it's I'm just happy that my body allows me to keep doing this, since 1996 to 94, it's and not doing like easy stuff, always, from the get-go doing hard stuff. I mean, I've done, since I started doing 100 milers in 99, I've done at least 3 100 miles or more, every year since that time. And actually it's like now I always like try to focus, you got to do at least 200 a year. so I've do that. So yeah, minimum, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing up your age. My mom taught me when I was a child not to ask a female her age.
No, I always tell people, because I think it's really important, because women will say, oh, I'll be talking to somebody just randomly and they're like, oh, I could never do an ultra, I'm too old. And I'm like, well, how old are you? And they're like 50 or even 45. And I'm like, no, it's never too late. I'm like going to be 60. And it's like, and they're like, what? And I go, yeah,
everybody's shocked.
It's like age is just a number, and it's like, and I have a big following of women that are in their mid to late 50s and they're doing 100 milers for their first time. And they, after reading about me, and they're like, well, maybe I can do this. Like if she's still doing this, it's like, and they're on a fresher body. I always tell them, you're like fresh. Like my body's been going for a long time. I go, so, it's like you still have a lot of potential when you start running. If you start running at 50, you still have several years of like peaking, because you've not been doing it for a long time, So
whenever I hear stuff like that, like what you just said, I'm not only a recovering addict, I'm a recovering fat guy. So so whenever I hear that, I'm like, my inner fat guy comes out, and it does the same thing it did when I was real heavy, which is it looks for the qualifying difference, or it looks for the thing to help make itself feel okay, the fact that it's not doing the things that you are doing. And so what it says is, you're different, you're genetically gifted, you're just different. Like the reason why you're able to do this at 60 years old is because of whatever little thing my brain wants to wrap itself around to make itself feel better.
Yeah.
And so if anybody happens to be listening to this, or if anybody has reached out to you and they're saying, but I'm 50 or I'm this, how do you help them understand, other than saying, because you could say, well, I'm 60, I'm actually older than you and I'm doing it. And they'll like, their head might say, yeah, but you're different because of fill in the blank. So if they happen to go into that place, how do you help?
Well, I tell them, first of all, you have to believe in yourself. And that's the biggest issue. People don't believe that they can, because they use that word, I can't, and they make an excuse. They add an excuse to it. But I go, you know what? The only difference is I believe in myself. I go, you just have to learn to believe in you. Like if that's something you want to do, that's the only difference. If it's something you want to do, you got to believe you can do it, instead of saying, oh, I couldn't, because it sounds like, oh my God, 100 miles or 200 miles, people are just like, and it's like, no, really, like you break it down into smaller portions. I go, but it's a mental thing. You have to, if that's something you want to do, you can do anything in life. We just make excuses a lot of times. We put up blocks because it's scary. You get afraid, or you fear something. And it's like, what do you fear? You're not going to, you don't know what's going to happen until you try it, as long as you get your training in and all of that, I believe anybody can do it, but they have to want to. Now that's the only difference. Yeah. So I always just tell people, you have to learn to believe in you. If you can't do that, then you're not gonna succeed at things, if you don't believe in yourself. And that's just the one little tweak you have to make in your brain. Like, I believe I can, and don't listen to the chatter around you. Because a lot of times, when I first started getting into this, doing 100 milers, people are like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's dangerous. You can't, And if you listen to those people, like, women only been able to run since, they weren't even able to do marathons in the 70s. It wasn't until 80 something or 1979 that we were allowed to do marathons.
Because it was unhealthy for women. Because
what? I just found out
what it was thought of.
Yeah. Well, I think the first women's marathon was like 1984 or something weird, like in the Olympics. But yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like, your uterus is going to fall out. Oh,
Yeah,
this
that's
and
what they
that.
thought. Yeah.
But now look how many years we've gone by and how many things that women have done. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, if we all believe that, women wouldn't be doing anything. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
but
we come up with
you
all
can't
sort of
believe,
crazy
you
beliefs.
friends and family that aren't into like a sport, they, you can't let them get that negativity because then it's going to make you think. But
Mhm.
I'm stubborn anyway, so it's like I don't listen to people. It's like I have my own mind. But it can be hard for people, especially women when they get older. Their husband or their parents or somebody are like, that's dangerous, and just like running by yourself. A lot of women come to me, they're like, aren't you afraid? Aren't there's wild animals and this, that. And I go, well, I've seen 15 mountain lions and I'm still alive. So that
Mm.
tells you something. In the Bay Area, I used to see them all the time. It was like not uncommon where I ran up near the Ohlone Wilderness that they're living out there and living large. And I would run by myself. So that's why I'd see them, because it was at the early morning and, that's when they're out doing their thing, or late at night. So, and I run by myself
Mhm.
out here. I feel safe here. It's like the trails, there's like nobody around. You just got to carry, I always tell people, be aware of your surroundings, women, like carry maybe some pepper spray and a knife, because if a mountain
Mhm.
lion was to attack you, you got to fight it off, and pepper spray is not going to help. So you better have a knife or something, but, you
Yeah.
know, you can't be afraid. Otherwise you're going to live in this little box and not, when I started running, like I said before, I didn't know anybody that ran. So when I started running trails, my second year of running, I was like scared. I thought the coyotes were going to eat me. I didn't know they didn't eat people, And the first time I was out, like at dusk, I would like did a longer run, at that time it was like, I did 15 miles and I was coming down it and it was getting dark and I heard all this howling and I was scared. So I understand when people are fearful. I didn't
Mhm.
know, like we have internet now, so you could see that, people aren't going to get killed. But I didn't know.
Yeah.
I was so scared. I was crying running down Mission Peak. I'm like, they're going to get me. They're going to get me. So,
So one of the things you mentioned there that's important, I think, is uh, you're talking kind of like building up belief and then doing it in sections or small portions was I forget the phrasing you said, but something like that. And so
mhm.
I think building up belief and one small challenge at a time initially to kind of
Yes.
build up that initial confidence is a really good way of going about it. And that seems to be a common theme, right? Like in recovery, we say one day at a time.
Exactly.
And in the ultra scene, we'll say one aid station at a time. I was
Exactly.
just talking with the Olympic discus thrower, Joe Brown, and he was saying one throw at a time, like literally putting a period at the end of each throw and saying, okay, that bad throw can't carry over into my next throw. Like
For
that
sure.
energy can't carry
Well,
over.
just like in a
Um,
race, in that section, like it's going to get better when you're ready to drop out of a 200 miler because you're tired, fatigued, you're hungry, things are hurting. It's like, you know what? Get to the next aid station, take a nap, and you change. Your mindset changes. So you
mm,
cannot look at a big picture. Like you're saying, the guy's looking at his
yes.
one throw at a time. So, like you said, aid station to aid station, but don't drop out until you rest and recover and then go on and just say, well, maybe at the next one. And next thing you know, you're getting further along. And that's happened to me before. I'm like, oh, I am so, I'm just having a really bad time. I don't feel good. I can't eat anything. Take a little nap. And then I wake up and I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I could keep, my legs are moving. I'm not throwing up. There's
Mhm.
nothing, broken about me. I'm just tired and I'm just not digesting things, but it'll get better. And it always does and down the line. And if it doesn't, and I always tell people, if you think it's a medical issue, then absolutely. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Don't just drop out because you're tired and you're sore, because we're all tired and we're all sore
yeah.
when we're out there doing what we do.
Yep. You had also brought up, how people, whether it be family, friends, or whatever, they'll kind of bring in their own influence or their own fears and kind of put
Mm.
them upon you. But let me ask this. So the question that they might ask is, And this is a question I get commonly, having done ultras and doing ultras myself, is do you think that's healthy for you? I think like seeing like James Lawrence, the Iron Cowboy, kind of seeing
Mm-hmm.
some of his cardiac test results after he did the 101 triathlon distance
Yeah.
triathlons, right? Or the full triathlon distance triathlons, 101 days in a row. His heart was in incredible shape. So I think in a short distance, we can say it's probably not going to do significant damage unless you have preconditions.
Yes.
But in terms of the more long-term effects, what do you, because, you know, you said you're 60, how do you see that in terms of longevity and it potentially having an impact in terms of lifespan and that kind of thing?
So I do have a heart condition. I have what's called mitral valve prolapse, but it's not ever affected me. I could see a cardiologist twice a year. So I do get echocardiogram and I do get ultrasound and all of that. And a couple of times it has regurgitated, meaning the valve stays and the blood comes in. And so they watch that, but it doesn't affect me. I mean, at some point, I mean, maybe it's going to make me slower, you know, as you get older, but you get slower anyways as you get older. So I believe that you should always, you know, make sure, especially as you get older, to make sure you go to the doctors, make sure you get, you know, especially with your heart. There's so many people that are young that die of, you know, cardiac arrest that never, you know, they're too young to even have to go to the heart doctor or have any issues. You can have underlying conditions. And I happen to be born with mine, and we've been watching it for probably 15 years and it's not affected me anyway. But as I get older, doing the 200s would be the harder thing, because staying awake all that time, so that can't be good for your mental health, you know, as you get older, you know, with brain issues. And I was talking to a friend of mine that she's a doctor and she does ultras, and she's not doing as many 200s. She goes, you can't keep doing that because it's, you know, irreversible damage to your brain. And I go, well, I've always been crazy, so it doesn't matter. But I get what she's saying. Like, the lack of sleep is not good for long term. And she was doing a lot of the 200s. And she's like, yeah, I'm just not going to do those distances anymore because I cannot like sleep for 3 to 5 hours in a period of 4.5 days. You know, it's not good for you. So that's the only thing that I think, I mean, if they did studies on people, but it's so new that there's not really, but that's the only thing I noticed. Like, I'm really good at staying awake and doing sleep deprivation. And so, I mean, as long as I'm going to the doctors and making sure I'm healthy, and as you get older, I mean, that's just something you have to do just to make sure everything is okay. There's no reason you can't keep doing what you do. I mean, there's 80-year-olds out there still doing hundreds, you know, so that's impressive. So I look at those people and I get inspired, you know. I'm like, well, if they're still going. I met a 90, I think he's 94 or 96. He was at Across the Years this year doing 100 miles in 6 days, but it doesn't matter. You know, it was through 6 days, but he's 94 years old. Like, getting out of bed would be a
94-year-old is
freaking
getting
win.
5 miles.
Yeah, in the period of 6 days, he did 100 miles, and his 60-year-old daughters, late 60s, were doing it too, and they ended up doing 200. But I was just so impressed. So every time I'd see him, I'm like, you are just so inspiring. He goes, oh, I'm not. He's like, it's not a big deal. Like, I'm not, you know. And I'm like, yes, you are. I mean, I'm thinking in my head, just getting up out of bed without a problem, you know, most 94-year-olds can't do. And here he is walking 100 miles in 6 days. You know, he had a certain amount of miles he did every day. And then, of course, he has to sleep because you're older and you need that, you know, downtime to recover. But just so impressive. You know, I went back and looked at some of his stats, and he was doing, like, you know, pretty consistently into his 80s, like these looped courses and staying out there, you know. And but I'm like, I hope I can live that long and do what he does and not, you know, be in a rest home or wherever, you know, like most 94-year-olds are. It's just incredible, you know, to see that these older people, well, now that I'm getting older, it's like the people I knew, they were like 60 and now they're 80 when I started. So it's impressive to me to see them still going. And then I have a lot of people that I have met through the years, and in my 30s when I started doing ultras and hundreds, and they stepped away for like 20 plus, 20 years, to raise a family or whatever. And then these, especially women and men, come back and they're like, "You're still going." Like, we're amazed. And I'm like, "Thank you." I'm like, "Well, I didn't know I was supposed to stop," but and the one thing though, getting into recovery and then finding running gave me confidence. Like, I didn't have confidence. It's like when you have to step away from, and all those friendships you had when you were using, because you can't be around those people. It's only going to put you in a backslide. And I always say, if I didn't get, clean and sober off drugs and alcohol, I'd either be dead or in jail, and so I couldn't go that way. And so it's like when I started running, I realized, I was working out in a gym feeling good, but once I started running, it really gave me confidence, like to be successful in everything I want to do. So
yeah, I think so. That's my two big concerns are in terms of aging and continuing to do ultras. One is the sleep deprivation thing. The studies that are coming out on sleep, like you said, and there's been a lot of studies that have come out, I think in the last 15 years, but last 10 years really, that really help pinpoint this. And we can see, like, you can equate what firefighters would be doing with their sleep issues, where when they do get to sleep, when they're on the job, they have to be kind of with one eye open sort of thing. And so it's not real restful sleep. And then when they go home, I had James Gearing on, and he's the podcast host Behind the Shield. And he's a big sleep advocate for first responders and things. And he was talking about, you have that 48-hour shift where essentially you're not sleeping for 48 hours. And then the whole next day, you're supposed to be recuperating, but actually it's poor sleep because of the previous 48 hours, which me doing ultras, I get, like, it's not like you get done after running 100 miles and you just conk out. No, that night of sleep that you actually get to sleep is terrible. The next night, like for me, like I'm cramping in bed. I'm like, and like trying to go to sleep and I can't go to sleep. And when I do go to sleep, I'm only dreaming about the race.
Yeah, you're like, wait, I have to get going again.
And so there is some concern for me personally with sleep deprivation things that take place. I don't think I do it often enough to be concerned about it, and I'm not in 200s yet. I don't know, but the other thing is, like, I have for my family, like every hill male other than my brother and me have died of heart attacks, essentially. So we have extreme, like, cardio and like also obesity has something to play in that and sort of stuff. But so, like, I'm concerned from a cardiac standpoint, like would something like this longevity wise be more detrimental than good? And there's always that argument of, well, the years that you do have, you want to make sure you lived. So there's that to it that takes place too. You don't want to just be sedentary. And if you get another 2 years of life and you're sedentary and living in a nursing home or something, like you said, I'm like, no, thank you. I'm good. But so anyway, that's a concern for me.
Yeah. Well, and as long as your like cholesterol and all that is good, that's what my cardiologist said. And he's very conservative and he's always shaking his head when he sees me. He's like, what races have you done? He's this Indian guy. And then I tell him, like, I reel off what I've been doing or what I'm getting ready to do. And he's like, well, he goes, you're, cause I'm vegan and my cholesterol and all that's low. He's like, that's why you could keep doing this and it's not making it worse. And like I said, I go and I check it, I'm not on meds. I'm not on anything like that. But what if I just sat around and didn't do this and wasn't vegan? It's like, well, then you're going to have heart issues anyways, like my father died at 49 and his parents lived to almost 90 and 92. And so nobody else in his family had any kind of heart issue. And he had a massive heart attack at 49 years old. And he was athletic and he was like, that's why it really scared me when they were like looking at mine and they're like, no, mitral valve prolapse. Since your mom had it, my mom didn't die of a heart attack. She died of something else. But they said I was born with it, and that's why my body has adapted with this. Once I started running, it doesn't, because people I know, other women develop it. Like a lot of women develop mitral valve prolapse from exercise. It's not uncommon for women to get it, and I have friends that have it, and they talk about like how they're gonna feel like they're gonna pass out all the time, and I'm like, I don't feel any of that, so I'm good. But yeah, as long as you're constantly like up on your health care, like getting that checked. Once I always tell my friends, I'm like, once you hit 40, just go in and find a cardiologist, do an echocardiogram, like get a stress, because what we do, you don't know, like if you have something underlying in there, and it'll show up if you go in, and that way you could address it,
Go as you bring up your parents, I would like to kind of segue into some of your upbringing and childhood, if that's okay, and just kind of bring into some of these things that we've been touching on so far, addiction and this sort of stuff. So it came from somewhere. And so as we kind of go into details with the addiction side and some of the harder things that you've had to deal with to come out on the other end and become more resilient as a result, let's start with childhood and your upbringing and that kind of stuff.
So I had a really good upbringing. The only issue that I had when I was 9 years old, a family friend, I got, basically I was molested, and that kind of changes your mindset. So I always say there's a reason why people get into using or doing drugs in life, and it's because of maybe something happened in their childhood or past trauma. So that happened, and I didn't address it. I was scared, it's a typical thing where like, I'm going to kill your family and this, that, and the other. And it was a very close family member. So I kind of hid from that for many years. And then I started using drugs and got in horrible relationships. And
At what age were you kind of getting into drugs and that kind of stuff?
It wasn't until I was older, actually. So I had a sister that was bipolar growing up, and she got into drugs early. So I have two sisters that are much older than me, and then me and my brother are close in age. So my oldest sister got married by the time I was 9 years old. She was 19, so she was 10 years older than me. And then my other sister was she was 10 and she was 8 years older than me. So they were both much older. It was like a different family. Even though we were the same family, my parents just happened to have me and my brother later in life. So it wasn't until I would say we moved when I was going into 7th grade. And that's when I kind of started, the kids I met were like smoking pot and stuff. So that's when I changed from that time, from when I was in 6th grade to 7th grade, and kind of met these kids that were smoking pot and got with that crowd in 7th grade. So I started drinking and smoking pot in 7th grade. And, through high school, same thing. Then my father died when I was 17. So I ended up going to like continuation school at that point. And
how was that for you? So you're already starting to mess around with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, but nothing hard, just like pot and drinking.
Okay. And then so you're already doing that, which, well, I won't go into detail about what that does to the brain and a youth, but and then by the time you're 17, so I'd imagine that at least stayed steady, the pot and alcohol, but by the time you're 17, dad has the heart attack and you're missing the male figure in your life.
I was in sports in between then, though, too, because I was forced to play soccer, even though I didn't want to. So it didn't get really bad until right around, when I was 16, then my father passed away. So at that point, it was like a free for all for me and my brother, because my brother was with my father. So he watched his dad die in front of him, trying to save his life, along with my ex-boyfriend at the time, when I was in high school. They were with him when he passed away. So it was very traumatic. So my brother immediately, he started, he was never doing drugs or getting into trouble, and he started getting in trouble. And so my mom immediately put him into a rehab. So he went into rehab right away. And I was off, just doing my thing. And so my mom, at some point, she's like, you need to either get into college or do something, with your life. So I went to cosmetology school. And we were just partying all the time, like
Mm.
drinking, I didn't get into, so my drug of choice was methamphetamine, speed, but that was like way
Me
later
too.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was like way later
Mhm.
on. So I was more into drinking. Occasionally I would do mushrooms, but not really into that. But I was really into going to the clubs, the goth clubs and all of that. And so once I got my cosmetology license and moved to San Jose, I got in this really horrendous, well, I was always in bad relationships just because of the
Mm.
sexual abuse that I suffered. So it was like, just really verbally and physically abusive relationships. So I was with this guy that I moved in San Jose while I was working there. And we did not, like, we were not a good mix. And we were together for like 4 years. And so I met this other guy and moved in with him immediately. And he was the meth dealer. So I didn't know this at the time. I just knew a lot of people were coming and going. And at that point in my life, I didn't really care. And one of my friends told me, they were like, he sells meth. And I was like, no, he doesn't. And then I had a conversation with him and he's like, yeah, I do. And my friends were all doing it. So I was like, you know what, let me do it. I want to try it. So, and I had tried it before and I didn't like it. And so I started basically using, and I remember the point that it went from just like on the weekends going to the goth clubs, dancing and all of that, to where I really got into an addiction. Was we were at a concert, me and a girlfriend of mine, and I felt like shit. Like I would only do it on the weekends and that was it. And then I'd feel like crap for a couple of days and then, be okay. So I was feeling like crap. We were at this concert and she's like, if you just do it again, you'll feel better. And I'm like, no, I only do it on Friday and Saturday kind of thing. And so she convinced me. So I did meth. And then after that, I started doing it every day. And it was just like a switch. And so we were dealing it just to like our friends. We weren't like big time dealers, but we were doing it so we can get free drugs. And at one point he wanted to quit and I was like, no, you can't quit. I'm like, I don't want you to quit. And I was using so much that I would lie to him and buy it off of him, for like saying I was going to buy some for somebody else, because he would give me an allotted amount each day and I would give him another 20, 25 bucks to have more supply. So I was hoarding it for myself. So yeah, so I got heavy into that. And as you know, it doesn't go well in life. Like you start losing everything. And I really, I had a job, luckily. Still, I was working in a hair salon, but it's like, it was only a matter of time. But I was like, maxing out on my credit cards, just like driving back and forth to LA to go to clubs. And, it wasn't good. So, and the whole time, like my mom didn't know I was doing drugs. And my sister, who at this point now, my bipolar sister, she was a heroin addict. And so she was telling my mom, like, she's on drugs, and my mom like wouldn't believe her, obviously. And I always felt in my heart like, oh, I'm not a drug addict because I'm not putting a needle in my arm. So I always I thought I was like fine because I'm not doing heroin, and that my sister was a drug addict kind of thing. So
we all have these kind of ways to make ourselves feel better about
well,
it.
yeah,
right?
because you
Like
got to tell yourself like, oh, you're not, you don't have an issue.
Yeah, for me, I was like, I don't have a problem because I was working 2 jobs. So I was working 16 to 18 hours a day. I was like, well, I'm not stealing from anybody. I'm, I'm working, I'm paying taxes, for crying out loud. Like, I'm I'm not a drug addict.
I was functioning, it's like, and some people don't. Like, it's like, because you're so amped up, you could like do everything. Like most of us, some people aren't into that. They just go into a bubble and they hide. I got to the point where I was like peeking out the windows. I'm like, the police are out. That you get into that spiral, which gets bad. But so anyways, what ended up happening is we got arrested. So it was like a whole episode of like cops coming in, banging down the door and the whole 9 yards. So a friend of ours, Jonathan, got caught, and he didn't want to give like the big time drug dealer away, so he gave our name. So basically he made a call to me and I answered the phone, and I was having the conversation of selling the drugs over the phone to him, even though the cops were there, I guess. And like, that's how they got my name involved. Otherwise it would have been just Jason, my ex-boyfriend. So they came to his parents' house. We were in his parents' house. His parents are like, what's going on? Like, they're like handcuffing all of us, the parents too. And they're like, where's Jason? Are you Catra? And I'm like, I'm Catra. And then they're like, okay, where's all the drugs? And I'm like, huh? And they're like, well, you guys have a lot of drugs around here. So they went in the room and Jason was asleep. They got him up, brought him out. He cooperated. I cooperated. They realized that we weren't who they thought we were going to be, like the people with, you know, all the drugs, like what they were looking for, the main guy. And so they went through the parents' house and then they stopped because they realized like these parents don't know anything. Like this is not like what we were led to believe, that they were the big time dealers. So we got arrested, taken to jail, spent 2 nights in jail. Jason had a warrant out for his arrest for like driving without a license. I don't know, something. And so he ended up, I got an attorney, he had an attorney, and my attorney was like, you're probably going to get charged the same thing with him. But he's like, the judge might be nice because you have a job and you've never been in trouble before. He goes, so he may find leniency on you and give you drug diversion. And that's what we were going for with me. So Jason got 6 months in jail. He got like 3 months with 3 months house arrest, and I ended up getting drug diversion. So I had to go to NA 7 days a week. I had to do drug testing twice a week. Like, it was pretty severe, and I had to go through I had to go to outpatient counseling and rehab, and then I continued going to counseling, and that's what really changed. So I got the help that I needed from the abuse that I suffered when I was young, and that was the tipping point. I realized that, yeah, this is why I'm using, like, you know, it's like it clicked, because people in those programs, especially when you're court ordered, they're like, how are you making your urine negative? And I was like, huh? Like, I didn't know all the tricks of the trade. They were like doing shit when they would get their pee test. Like, I was like, doing, I didn't know, you know, it's like, I'm not on drugs. And they're like, you're not using? And I'm like, no. So, you know, so I continued on going through therapy one-on-one too, as well. Even I was in the group therapy, and then I decided to do the one-on-one, and that it really, really helped. I mean, I realized, because even that spending those 2 days in jail, I looked in the mirror in the jail cell. It's not even a mirror, it's like those you know, metal thing that you can see yourself, and I'm looking in there and I'm like, how did I get here? Like, this isn't who I was brought up to be, you know. And that really, just spending that time in there, I got scared straight. And it doesn't always work like that for most people, you know. And it's like, I had a sister that was in and out of jail and a heroin addict, but because of her mental illness was never addressed, you know, with the bipolar, she used heroin, and ultimately she ended up dying like 20 years ago. So, but yeah, so I mean, I could have went down that road, you know. It's like, you know, and so just, you know, realizing like, yeah, I need help and I need to get out of this situation I was in. And so I broke up with the boyfriend and moved back home, and my mom had no idea. And so I had to come clean, and I told her the abuse that happened and all of that. And she's like, why didn't you, you know, the typical mom, why didn't you tell me? You know,
how old were you by the time this was happening?
I was 28.
Okay. So yeah, you had gone nearly 20 years.
Yep. Living with that.
Yeah.
Like
telling your family.
And you just put it on the back burner. Like, it doesn't affect you, but it does affect you because you're using things, you know, all the time. When I started drinking, it's like you're using that to mask the situation that happened to you, you know? So, and then I told her, and then, you know, came clean, and she understood, and she was going to Al-Anon for my sister, you know, because my sister was an addict, and my brother and me. So, but yeah, so it just changed. And so I continued on with like going to therapy and all of that. I still do therapy. It's like, you know, it's okay now. Like back then I was people are like, what is therapy? What's wrong with you? And it's like, well, I'm depressed. I have anxiety. I have a lot of issues. I go, but you know, these are tools. And I really think becoming an ultrarunner and doing the 200 milers, I was training back then when I was doing meth because I was staying awake for multiple days. So I always tell people, because they're like, how do you stay awake? And I do always have a goal of sleeping 5 total hours in a 200, 3 after 100 miles, and then 2 later on, and then 10-minute naps. I go, but I'm wired to be able to stay awake. A lot of people that have never been up for multiple days on meth that are doing these, they have a harder time. And they're like, how do you do this, Catra? And I go, I was training when I was doing speed. I was like,
maybe 200s are in my future then. I don't know.
And I understand what hallucinations are, because when you're on meth, you're seeing all kinds of it. To me, it's like being on meth when you're doing a 200 miler, but you have the wherewithal inside of you knowing that it's not really there. It's almost like a drug, like you're drug induced. But people that have never done drugs that do these things, they really get into a reality with their hallucinations in the 200s. And that's why they always tell you, and Candace is really big on, like, you need to sleep. People need to sleep, and they'll pull you in a race. If you're not making sense, they're like, you need to go down, you need downtime. And it's true, you know, because you make crazy, you know, decisions. It is like you're on drugs. So if you ever do a 200, you know, you would understand. Like, people that I talk to that used to do math, that do 200s, they're the same way. They're like, it's, you know, just like doing that, you know, but we're paying for a healthy environment to be like out of our minds and not doing drugs.
So you were sober for 2 years before you started running. Right. How was early sobriety for you?
It was hard. It was lonely because I, you know, had to get rid of all those friends, stop going to the nightclubs. You know, it was like, I didn't have any friends. I had to pull away from all of those people. And so I ended up moving out of the salon I was working on and moving to the Bay Area, and didn't know anybody that ran. So this was all like me doing me, you know, and just learning to love myself, basically. And that was like the real thing. You have to learn to love yourself. When you get sober, you really have to work on you, and you can't be successful if you're not happy with yourself. And so I learned a lot spending time by myself, you know, out on training, you know, like I didn't have anybody to talk to about my training program. It was just me, you know, and my friend Kevin, like occasionally he ended up, you know, being a good supporter of my races. And then he did one marathon, and that was it. He was like, no way. Like, and he was like a big time pothead, and I was hanging out with him, but it never, you know, he never smoked pot and stuff in front of me. And now I don't have like any desire. Like I became vegan at the same time I got sober. So now I've been, this year it's 30 years anniversary of me being clean and sober and being vegan. So it just gave me, you know, just eating healthy. It just gave me a lot of purpose. It gave me something else to do to keep my sobriety going. So I became this athlete, you know, started working in the gym 2 years later, you know, started running. And so, you know, eating healthy and all of that. And I think that really helped my mind when I got sober, was because I started eating clean. You know, a lot of times people get clean and sober, but they're just filling themselves with junk, sugar, crap, you know, and it's like, that can throw you into a depression, especially for women. You know, it's all of a sudden, well, if anybody, when you're doing math, you get very thin just by the fact that food is not like you know, you're putting all these toxins in your body. So once I became vegan too, I was very like, I don't want toxins in my life. So I'm not going to do drugs or anything. So, but yeah, sugar and all of that. So I was trying to eat very clean. And that was like 30 years ago. There wasn't much options of vegan. Now, like, you got vegan burgers, vegan hot dogs, there was none of that. There was like tofu. That was it. And there was not almond milk, like all these nut milks. Like, there was just, you only had an option of soy. And I didn't really like soy milk. So I was always just, you know, and I didn't even drink coffee as I'm sipping my espresso here. Literally, it wasn't until I was like freaked out by caffeine. I looked at that as a drug when I got sober. So when I was doing my first 100 miler, I was like, oh my God, I can't stay awake, you know? And somebody was like, well, at the aid station, they might have coffee, and they didn't. And this girl was with me, and she's like, oh, here, let me give you NoDoz. And I go, that's like meth, that's drugs. And she's like, no, it's the same thing as drinking a cup of coffee. And I was like freaked out. I'm like, in my head, I was like, that's like speed. So she convinced me to take half of it because I was like stumbling like in my first 100.
Mm.
And I took half of it and put the other half in my pocket. In like 15 minutes, I was like chatty Cathy again. I was like not stumbling. And I was like, there's something to this. And literally still, I didn't drink coffee. And occasionally, I would do the no-dose thing if I was falling asleep. And I didn't start drinking caffeine really until 2009.
Mm.
So that's how long. And now I'm like, I can't go without I have like a nice espresso machine. I like the nice beans. I like the grinding of it. So that's my bad vice.
So let's see. Early sobriety, you said, was challenging. And I know for me, like the first 6 months, and I did exactly what you just said. So I went into rehab weighing 135 and
Skinny.
like, I think like, yeah, well, the meth diet.
Yep.
And
I was
then,
like 89 pounds.
yeah. And I was drinking a fifth of liquor too at the time. So I was a night, right? So I was also an alcoholic. I didn't think when I went into rehab, I thought my problem was meth only. A fifth of alcohol wasn't my problem.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so I found out differently when I went to rehab. Is a deeper issue going on. And so, but when I went in, I was 135. When I left, I think maybe a year later, I was around 200 pounds. By the time I met my wife about 3 years later, I was 250 pounds. Right. So like,
so you started using food.
Yeah.
And I went the opposite. I was anorexic. So like I got an eating disorder. And I think that happens a lot of times. You end up having an eating disorder because you're trying to control something in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something, well, it was like just trying to find a hit of dopamine somewhere because it was so depleted from the meth use,
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and it wasn't only that, it was also relationships with women that was like short and not real,
healthy.
like just like basically using them as much as they're using me or maybe more. But so just unhealthy, cheap doses of dopamine was what I was seeking.
Yeah.
And because the first 6 months, it was like that post-acute withdrawal was heavy for me. I really felt depressed. I really felt down.
I did too.
And like no one was telling me, go get a gig, go work. No one was telling me like, go exercise. Like no one was saying go exercise. Like it was like go to meetings. That was the only information. Go to meetings. So I was doing that.
They didn't push that. Yeah, they didn't push that. Now there's like places that are recovery that are part of exercising because I think that was a big thing that they were lacking when you went into sobriety and getting sober and programs. You needed to do something else. You need to not just focus on that. You need to get out, get fresh air, and feel good about yourself. But it's like you're just in a especially if you're in an inpatient program, it's like they don't it's like you got to focus on healthy eating and get all of that so you can transition back into life and being healthy. So
yeah. So for you, you said you went into anorexia in early sobriety. Is that?
Yeah. So, once I started gaining, I was vegan and so I started gaining weight, but once I started running, it was just like, the eating disorder kicked in too. And so I just I was running and being vegan as part of like, that's why I was so thin, and then finally at some point I did have a scare where like, I almost passed out. I was out on a run and exercising. It was like 100 degrees out, and I was going to therapy still. And my therapist kind of brought it up. She goes, we need to start talking about other things. And she goes, what's going on with you? Like really what's going on with you? She goes, I realize you're exercising. You're vegan. You eat clean. She goes, you have lost so much weight. She goes, we need to address that. And she kind of started helping me with that. It took like a good 4 years to really be okay, like eating certain things. And now I'm just like, I'd just be happy with you. You are, it's like I finally, have overcome all of that, and it is hard for women, but it's like the older you get, I think the more you learn to love yourself, and you're just like, I don't give a shit what people think. I know I'm healthy and I'm active, and it's like you got to learn to love your body however it is. Sometimes I'm 5 pounds more, sometimes I'm 5 pounds less, but it's like I don't focus on a scale. I just focus on how I feel, and that's really important. So, but yeah, that kind of got going pretty hard for 4 years, and then I started addressing that with my therapist, and we worked on it. And so luckily it never got to the point where I had to be hospitalized or anything like that, but I got down there. So I was very thin.
Any in that period of time, whether it be the first 4 years of sobriety or the more early days of sobriety, any challenge with suicidality, severe depression, anything like that?
Right when I got sober, yes, I attempted suicide.
Okay.
So, and that was early on. And that was when I was still with the boyfriend living at his parents' house, and he was in jail serving his 3 months. And I decided, this is before I even told my mom what happened, after I had gotten arrested and stuff. And so I took a bunch of pills, and I realized that was a big mistake. And so I ended up going in the hospital for 72 hours, and they realized that what they told me is that you got to get out of that house that you're in. That's a toxic house, because his parents were alcoholics too. And that's when I realized, okay, I got to go home and address this with my mom. And then, so I because I was shameful. I was like, I didn't want to have to tell her. And then I told her everything that happened. So, and there's been times, there's been things in life where you get to that point, but I have all the tools that I know, like, I want to be here. Like I'm here for a reason. That's why I'm still alive. That's why I got sober. That's why, I wrote a book. That's why, I do so many races. It's just like who I am is to help people, and so I'm meant to be here. And there's always challenges in life, setbacks, things that happen that can throw you. But because we have our tools, in our toolbox, we just have to open that up, and we have to always remember to reach out and ask for help, So, and it's too many people, don't. And it's really sad because, that's why I tell my story. That's why I wrote a book. It's like, I don't want people to have to feel like they're alone, going through something alone. And that's what's great. The one good thing about social media is because so many people have stories to tell, and other people can relate, and they don't feel alone. Like before all the social media, it's like you felt alone. You didn't know any friends that were going through that. When you're isolated and you have no friends, it's like, where do you turn to, So, but yes, I've been through that, and I've suffered from depression and anxiety for pretty much a majority of my life. But it's like, I know what I need to do. And that's why I get out and run every day, or get out and just move every day. It's like when you're, when I'm like, I don't want to do this, when I lost my soul, I call him my soul dog, Truman, 2 years ago, that was like really hard on me. There was like, I lived in a daze for almost an entire year. Like, I still was running every day because I've been on a running streak for 12 years now. And I would just get out and do my movement. And I had gotten a puppy 12 days after he passed away. And it took me a whole year until the actual anniversary of his death. It clicked in my head. I was living in this loop of him being sick. The last month of his life, I knew, like, a year ahead, they're like, okay, he's got congestive heart failure. And I knew, he was getting older, and he was having an enlarged heart. And they said he's going to last 9 months. Well, he lasted 12 months. He lasted a whole another year. But the last month of his life, it was like he could hardly walk, and he was having seizures. And I just focused on that for a whole year of the traumatic, time of his last month of life. And it clicked a year later where I was like, why am I living in a time loop? I lost a whole year because I'm living in this loop, and he would not want me to be like living like that, like get out and run for him and bring his little ashes and put him on the peaks. And so it clicks, and that's what, it just took me a whole year of like sitting there, like, losing a dog is so much hard. I mean, I've lost 3. It's like harder than losing a human for me personally, because they rely on you so much, it's like they're everything. So yeah, but there'll never be another dog like him. But yeah, so I lived in that haze and depression and anxiety for a year. And it was like, I didn't show up to a lot of races because I didn't want to have to, like everybody loves him and they're, to go through that whole like, oh, I'm so sorry. And, it's like, I didn't want to have to be around people and feel that uncomfortableness and like try not to cry and all that. So it took me a year, and then I was able to like talk about it and move past it and still have him in my great memories. Sure, I get sad and I miss him when like all these memories show up and I have a hard time looking at those, but I'm like, no, Truman would want me to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did that happen? 2 years ago, you said?
Yes.
2 years
September
ago.
14th, 2022. So it's coming up on 2 years anniversary.
So you feel like you're kind of on the other end of that now, but you're
Yes.
still feeling the loss, but
Oh, sure.
you're kind
But
of on the other end of
each
it where
day
you're kind
it
of
gets a
living your
little
life in
easy.
present.
Yeah. And then I have Forrester, who I felt Truman sent me. And I thought for a whole year, I trained him and did everything with him, but I was like, he's not getting what he deserves from me. And he's, like I said, Truman sent me a good one because this guy's going to be he's a fast runner. Like he's already crushing it, at 2 years old. And it's like next year I'll train him to do an ultra. He'll be doing 20 milers this year already. And he goes to the vets. He got a x-ray and all of that. So people that know that have wiener dogs, they can't come at me because I've been trying to address this for years. I'm like, no, all my dogs have been vet approved to run long distance. So, and it's really important that anybody who wants to run with their dog, make sure they have a vet look at them, make sure they don't have an underlying issue, especially a wiener dog. And the misconception is those dogs can't run. They're going to hurt their back. Well, they get their backs hurt from jumping down off of stuff all the time. If you have little steps that they go down, it's not running flat. And too many people have overweight wiener dogs, and that's where they have the spine issues. So my dogs are fine. Yeah. So most people, when they see wiener,
is it the flat runs then that whenever you do a flat run, you're bringing the
oh no,
dog
he
with
goes
you,
with
or
me all
is
the
that
time. He goes up on the peaks.
on the hills too?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. No, we go up Bishop Pass, Paiute. We go up all the passes. Like I said, he just did a 14er last month. No, he's allowed to do that. So when we're going down, so I have him on leash and he has like a little handle on his harness. So I just kind of hoist him, and if it's too high, I can pick him up and put him down. But going up is not the problem. It's the downhill, but he's fine. Like, I just give a little tug on because he's flying. That's why, luckily, I have him on leash because he wants to eat marmots and squirrels and everything else. So he's all like on flat runs, around here on the trails, I'll let him off leash. But like in the mountains, man, if he goes missing, I'm not going to ever find him because he's so fast.
Okay. So why do people with trauma and addiction feel like they can resonate so well with running, and more specifically long endurance work? Like why is that such a common thread for people with a heavy background in trauma and addiction?
I think because we've gone through so much, so we are really good at enduring, and endurance sports are about enduring, So I think because of our mental capacity to go through what we've gone through, we're really good we have a higher pain tolerance, I guess, so to speak, because you've been through so much. And just from my experience talking with people, it's like, it seems like there's a lot of addicts out there that were for whatever reason, they choose to do these longer events. And it's, like I said, it's a lot to do with our stubbornness, being able to overcome things that we're wired to do well at this thing. And we're used to being alone in our heads a lot, because when you're going through all that, you have to work on yourself. So I think that helps too, just being out there. And I just think for your mental state, it's very helpful too. Just being out there and going through the training process when you're leading up for a race, just being out there and seeing how far you've come. That's a good marker when you're out there training. You're like, wait a minute, 10 years ago, like I couldn't even, I was doing this or doing that. For me, it's 30 years ago, but I look back and I'm like, man, had I not been a drug addict, I would have never become an ultra runner because I had to quit drugs to learn that there was something else for me in life. So I always say I have no regrets because I had to go through all these things in my life to get me to where I am right now.
The stereotype that I have popping up in my head right now is the old timer in the rooms and the 12-step rooms that is going to say to you or to me or to somebody else, could be Sean Livingston or like other people in the addiction world that are also in the ultra world, that would say, well, you're just substituting one addiction for another. Right. And what would be your response to that?
I would say, well, it could be an addiction, but like if I couldn't run tomorrow, it's not going to be something that, I know at some point this is going to end. I may not be able to run. I may get injured, but addiction is something you have to, like I'm going to survive if I can't run, but it's a positive thing. So even though many people think it's, you're just changing one addiction for another, guess what? It's okay. It's better than what you were doing before, right? It's better. We're not hurting anybody else. We're not, hurting our family members or whatever, by our addiction or getting into trouble, doing, horrible things. It's just about us doing what we want to do. And it's helping us to stay sober and clean. Maybe that person in that room, that old timer, has something else. He golfs. We could say, hey, that's a bad thing. That's changing an addiction for an addiction. Or tennis,
or he goes to a meeting every day. Or he goes to a meeting every day for the last 20 years, right?
And smokes cigarettes and drinks coffee. And that's what a lot of them do. But no, that's true. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think I've had a problem with that ever since I first heard that initial argument. And it was specifically, it wasn't from an old timer. It was from somebody in some sort of agnostic viewpoint that was just kind of saying, like, basically trying to tear down 12 steps. And it was saying, well, you're just substituting one addiction for another. And it's funny, now I do hear that in the 12-step rooms, or people from the 12-step rooms say that about athletics, or say that about endurance sports. So it's a weird thing now how that argument is carrying forth even within the rooms. But that being said, my personal, like, addiction is not well defined. There is no well defined thing. And so I've come up with something that tries to make it, tries to bring on some nuance to the aspect of the world. But essentially, let me kind of cut through it a little bit and say, with addiction, my view of it is there's a negative outcome as a result of the repeated behavior, right?
Yes.
And so there's negative consequences as a result. And those negative consequences are two things that you find to be highly important to you, or once found to be highly important to you, whether it be hobbies, family, connections, that kind of stuff. And so, or jobs and whatever. And so that's how I can't see the rooms being an addiction. I can see it potentially being an addiction.
Yeah. I
can see exercise potentially being an addiction.
Sure.
And when me as a therapist, when I've seen exercise addiction, it's horrific. It breaks up marriages. Families are torn apart because the person can't sit still for 5 minutes. They need to go up and down the stairs for real quick and come back into the room. Right. That's real addiction, where you can't be with your family. But for me, after a run, like, there's nobody I want to be with more than my children and my wife. I want to sit there in their presence, like I want to be there with them and soak it up. There's something where I feel more like a dry sponge in their presence to soak up whatever they're going to throw my way. And so, I think addiction has real addiction has negative consequences associated with it that are going to be
Absolutely.
detrimental to the lifestyle that you want to live. And so, yeah, that's my thought on it. I can't consider endurance. It's obviously a substitute, but substitute isn't bad. Substitute is a
No,
good thing.
exactly.
One other thing I wanted to ask you too, and if we were to jump back, so you've been in different relationships, and then you get married,
hmm
and so I want to talk about that marriage and kind of how that experience was for you. And I guess I'm going to stop talking and let you kind of fill in the blanks for me a little bit
Okay.
there.
So yeah, the marriage. So I was running and I was training at this is after my mom died. So I was training a lot in Yosemite and I started meeting a lot of climbers. So I was actually at a 100-mile race and I met this guy that he's like, I'm going to come to Yosemite and I'm going to climb this route on Half Dome called Snake Dike. He's like, you should climb it with me. And I'm like, I know nothing about rock climbing. So anyways, so I get back and I kept meeting all these climbers because I'd go to Yosemite from Fremont after my mom died and I'd run to Tuolumne and back. And they're like, where are you going all day? And I go, oh, just running to Tuolumne and back. And they're like, that's like 40 miles. And I'm like, oh, I know. I'm like, do these 100-mile races. So I started talking to these guys. And anyways, I became friends with this one guy, Pete. And so anyways, my friend came, I'm skipping all around. My friend came from Virginia to do this climb and he convinced me, to buy all this gear. So I told the climbing guys that I had been meeting, like, do you think I could climb? And they're like, oh, you could totally do it. You run 100 miles. It was totally different than running 100 miles. But anyways, my friend came and he taught me in a parking lot how to belay. We ended up going up Snake Dike. I did my first rock climb and I loved it. So I started hanging out with all these other climbers when I'd go on runs. And so me and this guy, Pete, started climbing together. And he goes, you remind me so much of this guy, Ammon McNeely. He goes, you got to meet him. And I'm like, who is he? And he started telling me he's like, does all these bid wall speed climbs. And so we're like driving through the valley one day. And he's like, there he is on his bike. So I go turn around. I want to meet him. So we ended up turning around and we couldn't find him. And then we saw his bike near the library. So we went in there and then he introduced me to him. And then we started talking. And I had this plan that I wanted to run 100 miles in Yosemite with a climb in the middle. Because I started getting into rock climbing. Not that I knew that much about it, but I was really good at pulling gear down. And I was climbing all the classics in Yosemite at this point. So I met him and started talking and we exchanged numbers and he happened to come to Santa Cruz and I lived in Fremont and I was telling him, I'm like, this is my plan. This is what I want to do. And he's like, thinking that was just like crazy. He's like, I want to help you on that. So I ended up going to Santa Cruz to meeting up with him and we started talking and basically we were inseparable after that. And so I did this climb in Yosemite with the 100 miles and mile 57, I climbed this route that was a 7-pitch climb and he led the whole way. So I climbed that and then finished off my run. And he was just so amazed at what I was doing. And he actually he paced me like 25 miles of this and he wasn't even a runner. So,
Wow.
So we were together for we were getting ready to climb El Cap and this big storm was coming in. So, and we had been inseparable for like 27 days. So we ended up, he's like, hey, let's go to Vegas and get married. He ended up, this is like so random. So we ended up going to Vegas, getting married. And he was like a pothead and he drank a lot, but he was so fun. At that point, my mom had just passed away and I was just looking and he was very inspiring to me. He was like, you could do anything you want. And he was one of those, like, you could do this, you could do that, So we were together and, then I realized, okay, he drinks too much. He smokes pot. But I mean, when he's doing his thing, he was like on the top of his game, with climbing. He still holds the most records for speed climbs on El Cap on various routes. And anyways, we ended up doing the John Muir Trail together and we met these two guys and they were like telling him, oh, our friend did it twice. And so at this point, we're like in the middle of doing it for the first, just doing a one way. And he looks over at me and he's like, don't tell her that, I go, tell me when. He goes, oh, my friend did it twice. And he did it in 18 days, or I think it was 18 or 20 days. And I looked at him and we weren't even finished yet. And I said, well, I'm going to do it in 12 days. And Ammon's like, I'm not going with you. So he taught me to believe that I could do like speed, because he was doing speed climbing like in a day, like all these routes that take people 3 hours. And he's like, that could be your own project. You could do it, you know, and he made me believe that I could. And I did it. But it's just like our relationship, like it was just deteriorating because he was smoking pot. He didn't want to work. And so anyways, we were together for like 3 years, and it took another few years to get a divorce because I couldn't pin him down. But he actually really made me go that next level of believing that I could do all these crazier things by myself without having somebody around. And like, so doing the yo-yo on the John Muir Trail that I still have the record for, I ended up doing that. And he made me believe I could. I was like crying. I'm like, I don't want to be out there by myself. He's like, you could do it. You're badass. You could, you know, so. And it just didn't work out. But anyways, he ended up dying almost, it's been 1.5 years ago. So he was a base jumper, slackliner and all that. And we remained friends. Like there was a touch and go period for like 2 years, but he came out to 3 of my Moab 240s because he lived in Moab, and he would come to see me at the finish line. And he died in a tragic accident. I mean, he was base jumping. He had his leg amputated from almost dying. Like he almost died millions of times. And he was just watching a sunset. Him and his girlfriend and their other friend went to go watch a sunset. They drove their motorcycles up to Hurrah Point, and he was going to sit down like on the edge of a cliff. And he was always on the edge of stuff. And he had a prosthetic leg, and it just like he lost his balance and he ended up dying. So, but you know, we remained friends, and that was my marriage. You know, it's like how I am, kind of crazy and do things on a whim. So, but I'm glad I met him, and I'm glad, you know, he was a part of my life because he was a great, you know, he was, even though he had his own issues, he made me really believe I could do a lot more than what I thought I could. You know, how I said, you got to believe in yourself. He truly taught me what it was like to believe in myself. So I owe that much to him, and that I learned from just being around him. He made everybody around him believe that, like random people. He's like, we could climb a big wall. Let's go. Like, and these, like I had been barely climbing, and he's like, oh, we're going to do El Cap. And I was like, huh? Okay. You know, and he taught me how to Jumar at the base El Cap, and, you know, we went up.
So did you climb El Cap?
So this is the story. So yes, we got halfway up, and the guy we were with, he was taking another newbie up, but this guy had been climbing for a long time, but he got freaked out over the exposure. So it was me, Ammon, his friend Evo, and then this other guy, I forgot his name, from Hawaii. So a storm was coming in, so we had to, you know, you never want to have to rappel. That's the most dangerous thing to do. So we ended up having to rappel, and he was trying to explain to me, because you know, I'm still new to climbing, and he's like, you got to take yourself off. And I was like, this is too much information. I'm scared. Like, I don't want to do that many rappels down. And so he goes, well, what we're going to do is we'll attach you and do what's called a fireman belay. So we had the guys take the haul bags, and then he was going to haul me down, basically. So we were on somebody else's lines that were up there. So we were rappelling down, and we were on our third line, our third rappel. And for whatever reason, the gree failed. It stayed open. It didn't lock, and we slid. So luckily the line was tied on a belay. So we took a fall. He fell into me. The rope caught my arm. Like, I thought we were going to die. So I broke my arm. So rappelling off at El Cap. Yeah, it was pretty bad. I was like all beat up because he fell into me. He was like above me like this, you know, and I was like on a line rappelling below him. And so, yeah, so I got halfway up. And
wow.
Yeah. And now I like, after that, I was always afraid to rappel. I'm like, I think I'm better off on the ground.
So no more El Cap returns.
No,
more
I
El
climbed
Cap.
for a bit longer after that. And I live in Bishop, like bouldering and stuff like that. But I'm like, I don't have any desire anymore. I don't want to get messed up, you know, and then I can't run. You know, the only times I've ever had any injuries were not running, were like different things. I used to do CrossFit like back in the early years, like 2006, 7 to 2012. And I got injured really badly doing stuff in CrossFit, like trying to lift too heavy, too fast, and all of that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, Is there anything else you feel like would be important to share that you would like to share that we haven't touched on today, Catra?
No, I think we touched on a lot. Yeah. Like women in running, aging, believing in yourself. Yeah. No.
All right. Yeah, I think we really hit a lot of important takeaways
Yes,
for
we did.
people to carry away through the conversation. And yeah, I'm really honored, Catra, to have you on. Thank you for coming on my tiny podcast. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links. The intro music was Two in the Back, performed by Sunday at Slims on Blue Dot Sessions.
Scar tissue woven into grace, each imperfection a familiar face. We wear our struggles, no trace erased. In vulnerability we find our place. Rust is gray, not decay. We're chasing shadows in the light, embracing failures, wings take flight.